Hey Rob, it's great to have you on the show. So you are a three times founder, wrote the book on how to build $1 million startup, the SaaS playbook without VC funds. My buddy and I love the videos on micro SaaS on YouTube that you do. And Rob promised me that he would come on after I do 10 episodes of my podcast. So this is a huge milestone for me. Big fan. Great to have you on the show, Rob. How about if you introduce yourself in your version?
Thanks so much. Yeah. So I've started six companies, five of them bootstrapped. I have three most recent ones. Folks may have heard of Drip, which is an email marketing platform that I sold in 2016. And then today I run MicroConf and TinySeed, which are the original community and accelerator for bootstrapped SaaS founders.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. I hope I can get out there one time to the conference. I heard great feedback. Um, so I know you have a lot of frameworks on YouTube. You're a framework guy. You've seen a lot of startups out there. I think you have a great high level view. The first question I would love to ask you, and especially since I'm doing this with different startups that I work with, is how do you go about product validation? Let's say you gained initial traction for your product, but at some point it started to die out. How do you continuously validate a new feature or a new product and go about that?
Yeah, and we were talking offline because I wanted to frame this well. Because let's say you're an indie hacker and you're selling a $50 a month product. The validation of that is very, very different than if you're selling something for $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 a month, or you're not sure how much to sell it for. You just know it's going to be expensive. And validation in those two instances is very different. The other thing I will say is it kind of depends, like validation is a pretty vague term. And it depends on, do I just have an idea and I want to validate? Or do I have, as you were saying offline, so let's couch it. Like I already have a small team. I've raised funding around something because I built something that maybe got initial traction or initial interest. So maybe I have one or two paying customers. Can we agree on that? But I don't really know how to find more, right? And so with that in mind, and let's just say it's enterprise sales, just to couch it as this is not a $50 a month product. And so when I say enterprise sales, I usually mean in that 2,000 a month and up. It's like 25,000 annual contract value up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I take this from a lot of this from my own experience, but a lot of this from tiny seed companies that I'm invested in. So I'm invested in 191 SaaS companies, B2B
Wow.
SaaS. And yeah, 171 through tiny seed and 20 on my own independent before tiny seed. So that's kind of my data set. And there's a microconf data set as well of people who I've talked to, but really tiny seed, I see their numbers every month and I do strategy calls and advice calls every week, half a dozen, of people saying who are in this situation, right? Our folks tend to get further than this pretty quickly. We fund in the 2 to 20K MRR, 2 to 30K MRR range. And then the idea is that they start adding 1 or 2,000 MRR, pretty quickly. So they branch out of this. But realistically, the idea of it's phrasing it as validation. It's almost like it's finding early customers, right? It's finding my third, fourth, fifth, third through 10th customer and figuring out if what I'm building really solves their pain point. Is that a decent summary of what you were thinking?
It's a perfect summary, Rob.
Okay, perfect. So there's a balance here. There are a few things you need to be, well, there's a couple things you need to be doing. Number one, you need to be getting into conversations, right? And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is how do I get folks to seek me out, to find out about what I'm doing. That's usually inbound marketing, and I'll talk about how I would think about that. And then there's outbound as well, which is the cold email, cold outreach, and it's going to events and this and that. We'll cover both those. That's the first thing, is just you got to get into conversations. And sometimes getting into conversations is a lot harder than people think. So we'll talk a little about that. Second thing is usually these conversations either go, hey, I don't have anything to sell you today, but I'm trying to figure out if what we're building will solve a deep pain point you have. So that's one way to do it. It's the not sales. It's the, hey, I'm the founder asking for advice. Or the second one is, I do have something to sell you. I just want to know if it's a fit, right? And it kind of depends on the stage or whatever, but that's how the conversation starts. It's customer development. Let's just call that phase. It's like, how do I pull pain points out of people and try to build products. So I think those are the two things. I'll start there and start talking through them, and then we can we can move around as we go. I'm going to assume, since it's enterprise sales, that it is some type of decision maker who's pretty hard to reach, an executive, maybe a VP or director at least. So it's not like I can just product-led growth my way in, hey, a developer signed up for free. I'm freemium. And you know what I mean? It's like, let's disavow ourselves of that notion. So usually what I do is I start with, there's 20 B2B SaaS marketing approaches that I know of. They're in my book, the SaaS Playbook. I start with the big 5 to try to generate demand. Okay, the big 5 are the most common ones that I see B2B SaaS using. And it depends on your space. It depends on how people are looking for you. And I'll talk through them. So there's content and SEO. That's 2, content, SEO. There's cold outreach. There's integrations and partnerships. And there are ads of some kind. I separate, and I'm going to say pay-per-click. Let's say Google, Facebook for those, not Capterra. Then there's 5 after that. And these really depend on your space. So in-person events, free tools, going on podcast and YouTube, affiliates, which wouldn't apply here, and then Capterra and G2. Okay. So you might say, well, which of these should I use? Well, what do I start with? If no one is searching for what you're building, you can't do SEO. At least you can't do like targeted SEO for XYZ software, or how do I solve this problem? How do I add captions to an Instagram reel? How do I add captions to a video, right? This is how Veed.io has become an incredibly successful company, is they have SEO'd either for the category you're in, which is XYZ software, or the thing you're trying to accomplish, all right? So in this case, if you're building something that no one is looking for, you can't do SEO. I mean, I can't. You can go higher up right? You can go to, let's talk about Eugene Schwartz's 5 stages of customer awareness. There's completely unaware. That's number 1. There is problem aware, where they're like, I'm aware I have a problem. Don't even realize that there are solutions out there. The 3rd is I'm solution aware. I'm aware that there are solutions, but I don't know anything about them. Then there's product aware, where it's like, ooh, I know product A, product B, and product C, but I don't really know much about them. And then there's most aware, which is like, I'm almost ready to buy. I have it in my head, the whole matrix of comparison of all that stuff, okay? So in this case, like I personally, no matter how much money I raised, I wouldn't go into a completely unaware space. That is very, very difficult to market. If you're going to do that, you basically need to generate demand. That's cold outbound, cold outreach, and going to events. Those are about the 2 things that I know how to do. You can also create content and try to get it to go viral on Hacker News and wherever, Quora and wherever else people hang out. But you're very limited if no one's searching at all for your category. There's no Capterra category. There is no search for the task you're trying to accomplish. That makes it a challenge. You could do a free tool as well. But let's assume that folks are at least problem aware, that they know, they're like, oh, I know I have a problem. I know there's a tiny company called Cloud Forecast, and it's AWS spending. It's monitoring and management to make sure your AWS spending doesn't skyrocket. So it's reports and it monitors. You can imagine what it does, right? Enterprise sale. You can imagine it sells to a director of engineering, right? Or a CTO or a VP of engineering. Folks are aware that they have this problem. Everyone knows at a certain point you spend a lot of money on AWS. May or may not realize there are solutions to that. But at some point, there is some traffic for like, how do I control my AWS spending? How to control AWS spending. So if I were Cloud Forecast, I would be writing a bunch of content around that topic of AWS, Google Cloud Provider, whatever else, all they're spending, and trying to get inbound leads, right? And inbound warm leads are so much easier to sell to, but they are hard to generate, and you can't control the volume of them usually unless you're putting a lot of spend, a lot of effort behind the marketing.
If I can chime in for a second.
Please do. Yeah, I was going to pause there.
Talking a little bit more about top of funnel, right? So like just addressing your audience in general through SEO, you feel like at that stage it would be a waste of time?
If they're problem aware? Is that what rephrase the question?
Aware of your specific problem that your startup is solving?
Yeah. I would say, in that case, if they are, then I know they're searching for it, then yes, I would go after SEO for sure. I was saying SEO doesn't work with unaware.
Got it. Makes
You know,
sense.
unaware is like deal of the day. It's like the Amazon days, or you go on Amazon and it's like woot.com. I didn't even realize I needed cheap sneakers and this book, right? It's like I was unaware of that, and yet I buy things off Instagram ads. Like that's problem unaware, right? That's completely unaware. So, yeah, that's kind of a top level summary of like if I were thinking about it. I mean, I'm a content SEO person myself. I've just done a lot. I've also done a lot of ads and a lot of integrations and partnerships. But it depends. You have to think about your space. If there is a category on Capterra or G2, if you search for your software category and G2 or Capterra rank high in Google for that, well, then you go to Capterra and you pay their bounty that they ask you to pay. And I recorded a whole video. If you go to YouTube and search for microconf Capterra, you will see a 30-minute is the masterclass on how to do Capterra. It's great if you can do it, and the clicks are expensive, but the conversion rates are high, but it doesn't work in every space. But it'll get you to decision makers because they know that they're going there for, for hard information.
What kind of
In this,
pricing are we talking about?
it totally depends on the space. It's like saying, what's a Google ad cost? Paper, AdWords. It's like, well, sometimes it's 50 cents and sometimes it's $50. It literally is like super wide depending on the competition.
Wow.
CRM software, much, much greater than lawn maintenance contractor software.
Got it.
So yeah,
So you had some success doing that with a bunch of startups, and you think that it's worth checking that out, basically.
Capterra.
Yeah.
There are, when I wouldn't say a bunch. So here's the thing. Any given marketing approach that I talk to my companies about, it seems like it depends, but like cold email for cold outreach, cold LinkedIn, cold DMing and email seems like used to be about 1 in 4 companies I talked to about it could get it to work. Like meaning the ROI was decent. Now it's more like 1 in 5, 1 in 6 if you're in spaces where it's clogged, where there's a lot of it. You know what I mean? So it's like that gives you an idea of like 15 to 25% maybe it works. And that's how I feel about Capterra. Probably 1 in 5, 1 in 4. It's some number like that. All of these things it's just a matter of none of us know what's going to work. When I was growing my last startup, when I'm growing my 2 companies now, I don't know what's going to work, but I prioritize things and I take my best guess and I start at the top. And we start executing, and I either do it myself or I have someone on my team start executing, and then we get the feedback in a few weeks. Is this working? Like I do a lot of YouTube, I do a lot of podcasts. I bought some ads a few weeks ago in a podcast player to try to get clicks and new subscribers. And oh my gosh, it's several $5 per new subscriber to a podcast. I learned something. Now, am I going to scale to 10,000 listeners, or add another 10,000 listeners by doing that? Probably not going to spend that much money because that'd be $50,000. But at least I learned there's a feedback loop, right? And what I find with a lot of founders is they don't try enough stuff and they don't dig deep enough into any one thing. Like you have to give it a good try. Like to do like if I was trying AdWords, I would spend thousands of dollars a month for 3 months before I gave up on it. And, you may want to learn it yourself. Most of the time you want to hire someone who already knows how it works. But that's a mistake that I see folks make because it's like, well, I tried these 10 marketing approaches and none of them work. They don't work in 2024. I hear this. Yeah, AdWords doesn't work anymore. And it's like, what? AdWords? There are people building $10,000,000 businesses on AdWords. So don't tell me it doesn't work. Either you're not good at it or maybe in your space, the ROI is not there. But any of these things can work. So that's what I'd encourage folks to think about it is you have to be as deliberate. If you have an engineering process with your product and you're making decisions about what to build and you're doing agile and you're doing agile, that was a weird phrase, but you're prioritizing and you're building stuff. You have to be, in my opinion, as deliberate and as diligent and as focused on lead generation, marketing and sales as you are on your product and engineering. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. You're going to be another company that fails because no one cared. No one knew that they existed.
And what are your thoughts on demand generation at such a stage? Just, thought leadership, video. We can see this a lot on TikTok these days, or different founders going for the founder-led marketing thing, talking about interesting things in the space, doing silly things on video, getting a lot of engagement actually. So for example, let's say you start a shoe company, you're competing with Nike, you have an edge specifically for running shoes with technology in them. And then posting on LinkedIn videos talking about how do you choose the right running shoe. Should I do it this way or should I do it that way? Establishing as a thought leader and just constantly providing value. Do you think this would be too early on to do something like that?
No, it depends though. You brought up two separate things. One is you brought up a direct to consumer example, a B2C, and that's a whole other conversation. Let's separate that out because yeah, if I'm selling shoes, if I'm selling anything for some consumers, you can't afford to buy Google ads as a result. I mean, and Nike does it, blah, blah, blah. But like if you're a startup, you have to have basically have mostly free marketing. So in that case, I'd say absolutely. But let's go back to our example of our enterprise play, selling to directors and VPs of blah, 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 right? In that case, should you think about it? Here's how I'd think about it. Are you good at it? Is it something you enjoy? And is it something you do well? If I was starting a company, I'm okay on the mic. I'm pretty good on on camera. You know, I've recorded to 300 YouTube videos and 1,000 podcast episodes across mine, and my wife and I used to have one. So for me, it would absolutely be a founder-led thing because it's not even a gift. It's something I learned to do. It's a skill of mine. And that's what sometimes you have to look at that. If you don't have that skill though, you're terrible on camera and you're going to pay a production company buckets of money to try to make a funny TikTok video. No, not in your skill set. For B2B enterprise, would I advise any of my Tiny Seed founders, you know what you should do? Start a blog, start a podcast, and start a TikTok channel. No, I wouldn't advise any, or even a YouTube channel. I would not bring that up in my top 10 recommendations for them. But with that said, of the, again, 190, whatever that I'm invested in, are there some companies that have YouTube channels with like 1,000 subscribers, 2,000 subscribers that get a huge amount of leads from them? There are. And that founder happened to be gifted at it and wanted to do it. So that's usually how I would think about it. I don't discourage people from doing it, but I do say, look, cold outreach, if it works, is going to provide short-term, quick results, and it's a funnel you can control, like it's a nozzle you can control. Podcasts, they may be fun, but they take a lot of time, and it's a long-term play. Even YouTube, you can catch the algo. There's some things you can do there, but it's certainly lower on my list of B2B approaches, but not a hard no.
I like the concept of how you're connecting this to individual skill because a lot of advice out there is so generic. It's like, yeah, it worked for me. Now I'm going to teach you how to grow to 30K followers. And you're just going to dump loads of time into creating a TikTok that's just not working and you're not great on camera. So I like that part of assessing. And if we're talking about assessing, how do you go about experiments? I did hear a little bit of a brute force approach over here, right? So like you have your top 5, let's experiment, let's run the ads, let's do SEO and rethink and reevaluate after 1 month, for example. How do you go about assessing success or failure and when it's time to move on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like what you said about the generic advice because that drives me nuts. And it's usually a founder who has had one success and now they think everyone should succeed the way they did. And that founder often forgets that maybe they're great on camera and not everyone is, or maybe their space really had a gap where no YouTube channels were, and not every space has that, right? There's so much context to be there. I actually tweeted earlier this week, someone said, I'm plateaued and I keep getting advice and it's not working. And I chimed in, I said, I have cataloged 10 different reasons for plateauing in B2B SaaS. So unless someone knows your exact reason for plateauing, then no advice is helpful, right? Because they can tell you how to fix 1, 2, or 3, but what if you're 6, 7, or 8? You know what I mean? So I like the context. Your question was, how do I think about demand gen, right? Lead gen, and how do I attack it? How do I actually prioritize and execute? Yeah.
Or the second question was just how you approach experimentation in general. You can attack any one of those questions.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So usually, what I think about if I'm B2B SaaS, and it depends on my resources, right? So I want to do as many experiments as I can afford to at one time because then I'm running in parallel. So when I was bootstrapping, I usually could do 1, maybe 2. because I was in charge of everything. Didn't have money to hire a marketing strategist, didn't have money to hire someone to execute, so I was just doing everything. And if I can only do two, I'm usually trying to do one fast marketing approach and one slow marketing approach. So fast is like cold outreach would be one, affiliates, usually Google Ads, like you can set it up today and you have traffic tomorrow, right? These are fast. Slow is like SEO. You build that up over time. Integrations and partnerships, if you don't have a network, right? Because then it's enterprise sales and you're kind of trying to do stuff there. Going to events is pretty slow. Free tools is slow to build the tool and launch it. So I try to do one fast and one slow so that I'm making a bet 6 months, 12 months down the line, but I'm also taking care of stuff in the short term. And then, as we've said, I would look at my space, I would order them in order, and I would try to execute on two of those. Now, if I had a team and I could execute on, say, 4 at a time, I would probably do that. It depends. And then how do you measure is your other question. Rule of thumb that I've heard from people who do a lot of, say, cold outreach, they're like productized services, right, that you know about. Usually they say you need 3 months to have enough data. The first month, you're just trying to figure it out. Like, is your list good? Is your content, is your content any good? Second month, you start to refine it. And by the end of the third month, you start to have an idea. So usually they have 3-month minimums. I think like Google AdWords is probably similar, where it's like, I'm looking at the numbers early and I'm trying to optimize. If I'm at a 10x spend on my payback, for instance, with Google Ads, like I'm spending 10 times what I can possibly, manage to spend, I'm discouraged. Getting from 10x to 1x is like really hard, right? But if I'm at 3x, let's say I can afford to spend $5,000 to acquire a lead, or $2,000 or whatever, and I'm at $6,000, so I can spend $2,000 and I'm at $6,000. 3x is like, I might be able to optimize my way out of that, but I can't optimize my way out of I'm spending $20,000. So that's the kind of thing that I think about. I usually educate myself enough that I kind of know how it works. Sometimes I go deep, and then I try to hire someone who really knows what to do if I have the budget. When I bootstrapped, I just had to learn it. I would read books, I'd watch the YouTubes, I'd watch the channels, and I'd figure it out through experimentation. It was a lot of sweat equity, so to speak, because I didn't have budget. These days, like I'll be, with MicroConf and Tiny Seed, like we just attacked YouTube for 2.5 years. I released 52 YouTube videos a year, and we were paying a consultant like thousands a month, as well as a whole production team, to get them shipped. And we went from 10,000 to 80,000 subscribers in that time. And then it plateaued. So then, to your point, do we keep doing it? How long do we keep doing it? And we kept doing it for about 6, 7, 8 months, mostly plateaued. It's adding like 1,000, 1,500 subscribers a month, but that's a plateau for us, right? Because we were adding like 6 to 8,000 a month. So then eventually I just said, I don't see how we figure this out. Let's put that budget towards the next thing. And then we're going to experiment. And I'm going to hire someone who knows what they're doing, hopefully, again, because I have budget. Otherwise, I'd figure it out myself. And then we're going to go all in for it for at least 3 months, probably 6, knowing me these days. There's only so many channels, right? And so you give it what you can. We've only talked about the demand gen part, by the way. There is this second part of like, so what happens if people are coming in and they're curious? What are the conversations? Are you having conversations with them? How do you figure out, how do you close sales, which I'm not a sales expert, so I'm not going to give you advice on that, but we can switch to that part if it makes sense.
So first of all, I'd like to comment and say, I feel like you have one of the first things that pops up for me when I hear you speak is you have so much structure in the way that you're talking. And I can feel the programmer part in you coming out, like very algorithmic. Here are the top 5 activities. Here's how you gauge success in each one of them. And I'm wondering if you already created content like this. But for me, I think those playbooks, and maybe in your book, is super, super valuable, right? So step 1, here are the top 10 activities. I know on LinkedIn and social that people are telling you to do that. Here's how you check if you're good enough to go for that channel. Okay, you decide on your activities. If you're going for SEO, if you're going for outreach, here are the benchmarks for this, and this. You didn't reach that, time to move on. Now, obviously, it's not a one size fits all, right? There are always deviations. But I think having those benchmarks in that playbook at least for me, is really, really helpful. So I really like your way of thinking. And I'm very familiar with a lot of things that you're mentioning, but your perspective makes it very new and refreshing for me. So thanks for that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, there are. I am an engineer. I was a developer, and so there are right brain marketers and there are left brain marketers. Right, left brain's more engineering, and I've always very much been about the numbers. And if the numbers aren't making sense, it's not that you can track everything and attribute everything. And it's like, oh, I know 100% that YouTube drove this many email subscribers. Yeah, you can't do that, but you kind of get a directional correctness. There's someone else. I don't know if you follow Brian Balfour, but he used to run growth at HubSpot. He's very, very framework driven and very knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. And I've learned a lot from him over the years, but I appreciate that. It's definitely because I have to communicate. You know why? It's because I have to communicate this over and over and over to my founders on YouTube, on the podcast, in books, the SaaS playbook where I tried to dump, it's 200 pages, but it's very dense, it's compact. And that's what I do now. Like that's kind of the legacy of the rest of my life is trying to multiply the world's population of independent, self-sustaining startups. Like that's my goal in life. And so how do I do that? I try to give the best advice I can. And so if it's one-on-one, it's very specific. And if it's like this, where it's one-to-many, then I try to be as specific as I can because nothing pisses me off more than the person who comes on and says, "We'll build an audience and then sell them stuff." It's like, yeah, great. That always works, right?
The other point that I really loved is it made me feel almost like you're mountain climbing. Like a lot of people look from the side and say, oh, they hit it big on YouTube. Let's go for the same thing. But the way you talked about it is like, hey, I plateaued at 80K on YouTube. What's the next rock that I can latch onto that I think would be the next best experiment? And it doesn't mean that YouTube is over, but that's where I'm at in my path now. And I have my own path and I can learn from other founders and their paths, but I have to be very aware of where I'm at now, what I'm good at, what worked until now. So I really love that approach.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And just for the record, like when we started plateauing or slowing down on YouTube specifically, we said, do we just stop? Do we back off? Do we do less YouTube? What's the effort here? And so we cut our production in half. So we still ship 26 videos a year, but it's just much, that sounds like a lot probably to some people. It's just not, given the pace we were running at. And so, yeah, and it really was a what's next. Now, one might argue, well, could you have made YouTube, could we have gotten to 100, 150, 200? I do think we'll get to 100, by the way. It'll probably take, 6 to 12 months. But what we realized was that the low-hanging fruit was gone and that the world's population, my whole market is not that big. It's hundreds of thousands of people. Of all the people that are legitimately thinking about starting B2B SaaS companies, it's just not that many. Like there's 40 or 50,000 B2B SaaS companies in the world that are actual like companies people can track. And then the people who aspire to do it is hundreds of thousands. So to get 80,000 on YouTube and to be approaching 100, it's kind of like I'm squeezing blood from from a rock at this point. I'm not going to get to 1 million subscribers. I'm not Mr. Beast. I know that. So what's next? And we actually looked at, let's do an example. We looked at TikTok and said, well, because we can do video, we're good at video, TikTok the next thing. And we dove deep and we looked like who's making this work in an actual B2B fashion, not selling crypto or just the bullshit like internet marketing, like get rich quick, all that stuff. And there's basically approximately 0 people that actually have reasonable advice on TikTok. And on TikTok, you don't build a brand. You are just one of many that people are scrolling through. And there are... It's not as good at today as we record this, by my assessment. It's not good enough for B2B for what I want to do, for me to invest $10,000 a month or whatever we're going to invest in the thing. For us, it's, another channel like LinkedIn, for example, right? That would be much higher on my list than YouTube. Than TikTok.
Got it. So let's go back to that initial list of those activities that you would recommend for seed stage founders. So you said that you probably wouldn't recommend video creation or TikTok for those founders unless they're super good at it, right?
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
You did mention content SEO. What were some of the others that you would put high up there? Outreach?
Cold outreach. Yep. Ads, meaning like pay-per-click. So we're talking Facebook, Instagram, AdWords, depending on where your audience is, and integrations and partnerships. Those are the top 5. Integrations and partnerships are the same thing. They're both enterprise sales, business development. But with integrations, you write code. And with partnerships, there's no code. It's just like a joint venture or whatever. Those are usually
Cool.
the top five.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on what's going on with cold outreach today, because
Hmm.
a lot of companies out there are complaining, or we're seeing a huge drop in success rates, both via email and LinkedIn, especially with the rise of AI. People are getting spammed everywhere. What's your approach on modern outreach?
Mm.
How would you
Yeah, it's
approach that? Whether it's sales or product discovery, it could be either one.
sure. Well, so product discovery, it's a little easier because you literally just hand email people yourself and say, I am a founder. I don't have anything to sell you. And you need an angle. You don't, sales, it's like, I'm going to email or cold outreach 2,000 people a month versus product discovery. I could probably send 50 emails and get 5 replies, right? I mean, that it's just a different ballgame. Yeah, no, the thing is, marketers ruin everything, is what happened. And email used to be this amazing thing that I looked forward to, logging into your inbox. Does anybody look forward to that anymore? Now it's like unsubscribe from a bunch of lists that I've never signed up for, mark as spam, report as spam, permanently block. Like that's where I'm at, right? I get 30 to 50 cold emails a day probably. And that's the real problem with it, is that people have turned it into spam. I mean, I'm wondering when the laws are going to change, because canned spam was to keep people from just buying, it's a US law, of buying a 50,000 person email list and just sending bulk email to it. And you can't do that. It's illegal in the US. They will fine you. And people who've done it a lot have been threatened with jail time. I don't know if they actually went to jail. But there's like, it doesn't say if I send 2,000 emails that are like personalized and kind of from my individual account, that's kind of the same thing as bulk email, but it's not technically under canned spam. And I'm wondering when that law is going to change. So that's the scene today. If you're going to do it, it works so much better in places in the verticals that are not already inundated with it. And so choosing your market is actually a decent part of knowing what marketing approaches you can use or what outreach approaches you can use. We have a company who sells to architects and interior designers, for example, and their outreach has traditionally worked pretty well because it's not startup founders, directors of technology, VP of tech, you see, right? Those folks, I mean, these are terrible spaces, right? To do cold email. It's not to say it doesn't work, but it's really tough. The other thing is how I would approach it today is I would hire someone who knows how to do it. That's what I would do. And so at least, here's the thing. If I can pay a productized service or one of these cold email outreach people, what do they cost? Between $1,500 and $3,000 a month, maybe. These are the kind of the ranges that I see. So, and usually it's 3-month minimum. If I can pay them so that's $4,500 to $9,000, somewhere in that range to get 3 months. But I know that they're pretty good. And I know if it doesn't work, that I can't make it work either, then I'm going to spend the money. Again, if I have a seed round, that's what like if I were bootstrapped, I'd have done it myself, right? But the problem if you do it yourself is you don't know if it's a bad player or bad instrument. Meaning you don't know, is my violin a piece of crap and I'm a good player, or did I just, did I do it wrong, right? I actually have a good violin and I don't know how to do it. So I don't know. That's a short answer. Like what I can't tell you is here's the cadence that I would use and the subject line. Cause like I don't do that on a day-to-day basis. And it's different than when we used to do it. Last time I ever had anybody send a cold email for my companies was, 8 years ago or whatever, like my company that I run. So that's how I think about all these marketing approaches is like, where are the gaps? I'm usually trying to think of where are the gaps? Where's there a little bit of an opening? If I'm competing against HubSpot on SEO and content, it's going to be tough. It's not that I can't beat them on, but then I'd be like, all right, what are the long tail terms that they're ignoring? What are the angles for this that I'm not going head to head against HubSpot or Salesforce, or V.io or whatever against the exact terms, all the head terms? It's like, where are they, where the long tail or other edges that I can be thinking about as I'm trying to get traction, right?
I love that advice, Rob. For me, it was awesome having you on the show. And I would like to wrap up and ask any last words of wisdom for founders out there.
I think when it comes to marketing and sales, so I'm a developer. And I used to think that marketing and sales was, marketing specifically, was kind of bullshit. And I was like, it's just a thing. You buy some ads and then it works. And it's not. It's an actual, there's a chunk of science. There's some art in it too, but there's a good chunk of science to it. And I think if, as a founder or an exec at a early stage company, like, educating yourself on how it works, you're not going to get everything right. The tough part is if I write code and I know it compiles, or the interpreter, whatever, if it works, it works. If I try marketing approaches, I don't know what's going to work. And that uncertainty can be hard for us more left brain thinkers. And so you just got to try it and get better.
I love that. How can people find out about you and your new book, Rob?
Yeah. So if folks are YouTubers, they should head to youtube.com/microconf. When I say YouTubers, I mean if they watch stuff on YouTube, because I release a video every other week on that channel. But if you listen to podcasts, you should check out Startups for the Rest of Us. I'm on episode 721 of that. I've released 52 episodes a year for 14 years. And that's where I talk about all this kind of stuff every week.
Thanks so much, Rob. This was really insightful for me. I had a lot of fun. Definitely worth waiting those 10 episodes. So thanks for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure.